there was a radiance that did not come from gold or from flash. A white, clean light that seemed to have been born before the noise. When Grace Kelly stepped into a room, the air tightened. Conversation softened, and the world arranged itself around her silence. In the years when glamour was a battle of sparkles, she chose stillness. She didn't need to move fast because time followed her. A single glance was enough to turn a simple dress into a vow. Every line of her body was an invisible design, every pause an act of power. Actresses competed to shine. Grace competed to endure. She didn't play roles, she performed perfection. And while Hollywood manufactured artificial goddesses, she became something far more difficult to create, a symbol without age. The lights could go out, but her figure kept burning, white, precise, incorruptible. She was the woman who taught the world that true revolution does not need to shout. It only needs a gesture that cannot be forgotten. Grace Kelly didn't change fashion with dresses. She changed the way the world understood beauty. And ever since, each time a woman dresses in sobriety, the echo of her elegance breathes again. Before thrones, before headlines, there was a young woman with a restrained gaze who observed the world the way one studies a work of art. Philadelphia watched her grow up among orderly gardens, mothers in white gloves, and the American obsession with perfection. Nothing in her seemed loud. Grace Kelly learned as a child that discretion could have its own kind of radiance. In the 40s, while other girls dreamed of Broadway stages, she dreamed of a line, of a silhouette, of the harmony that appears when everything is in its proper place. Style did not choose her overnight. It formed slowly, like the reflection of water on marble. Her mother, an etiquette instructor, taught her that posture reveals the soul. Her father, an Olympic champion, instilled in her the discipline of the exact gesture. That combination of rigor and restraint would become the alphabet of her future elegance. At the Drama Academy in New York, Grace stood out not for her voice or her movement, but for her precision. While the other aspiring actresses exaggerated to be noticed, she mastered the art of the pause. Directors watched her without understanding. She doesn't act, she breathes beauty. Her wardrobe was a reflection of that philosophy. White silk blouses, high-waisted skirts, pastel tones. It wasn't luxury, it was proportion. Each garment spoke of balance, of a woman who didn't seek to seduce, but to bring order to chaos. And without knowing it, she was building a new aesthetic grammar, elegance as serenity. By the late 40s, magazines began to notice the blonde actress, who looked like a Vermeer painting brought into the 20th century. Her fair skin, her long neck, the way the light sought her. Brands began sending her clothes. Photographers waited for her at the studio doors. But Grace didn't follow trends. She silenced them. At a time when Christian Dior had already launched his new look, and the world adored impossible waists, Grace Kelly offered an alternative, the charm of the natural. Her elegance wasn't a reaction, it was an evolution. She imitated no one, belonged to no single country. She was the synthesis of European sobriety and American freshness. Fashion critics began speaking of the Grace Kelly phenomenon, a way of dressing where everything seemed measured, yet nothing felt forced. Women recognized themselves in her. She wasn't an unreachable diva. She was the promise that beauty could be calm. The 50s were about to begin, and with them, the reign of an aesthetic that would change the world. Grace didn't know it, but each time she adjusted a button or lifted her chin before a camera, she was writing the first page of a new manifesto. That elegance is not adornment, it is disappearing with style. The Atlantic wind was waiting for her. Cinema was calling her. And fashion, without knowing it yet, had just found its most perfect mirror. Hollywood received her with impatient lights and a script already written, to be just another star in the parade of beautiful faces. But Grace Kelly did not fit the formula. She wasn't the wild sensuality of Rita Hayworth, nor the dark magnetism of Ava Gardner. She was something different, a presence that did not impose itself, but suggested itself. A kind of beauty that forced the viewer to stop, to look with respect. In 1952, Alfred Hitchcock saw her for the first time through a camera test and murmured, "She isn't an actress, she's perfect geometry." That encounter would change the history of cinema, and also that of fashion. In Rear Window, To Catch a Thief and Dial M for Murder, Grace Kelly embodied a new kind of femininity. Polished, exact, dressed in serenity. The camera loved her because her face did not act. It simply reflected the light. Every film became a silent runway. The dresses designed by Edith Head set trends before reaching the theaters. Wide skirts in ivory tones, blouses with structured collars, gloves that ended where imagination began. Women imitated her neat updos, her contained makeup, her posture. For the first time, elegance was not reserved for aristocracy. It became a cinematic promise for anyone who knew how to remain calm. In Rear Window, that white chiffon dress with the black belt was more than a costume. It became a symbol. Purity and desire could coexist. Sensuality could be discreet. Women's fashion entered a new era, where modesty was not weakness, but mystery. And behind that silent revolution was Grace Kelly, with her blue gaze and her effortless existence. By the mid-50s, Hollywood was a temple of exaggeration. Studios competed for younger, brighter, more provocative stars. But amid all that excess, Grace remained a fixed point, a white line in the middle of the noise. Directors filmed her as if she were natural light. Photographers captured her as if time did not touch her. And fashion, fascinated, turned her into its involuntary ambassador. The covers of Life, Vogue, and Harper's Bazaar proclaimed her the best-dressed woman in America. The great designers sent sketches inspired by her appearances. The clean cut of the bateau neckline, the skirt that floated instead of spinning, the intelligent use of beige and sky blue. Her personal wardrobe became a masterclass in proportion and restraint. What for others was just an outfit, for Grace was a declaration that femininity did not need to be shouted. Every garment spoke of the modern woman, independent, educated, self-possessed. Her image on screen inspired a generation emerging from post-war life and searching for a new ideal, elegance as refuge. In To Catch a Thief, dressed by Edith Head and wrapped in blue silk, she traveled the French Riviera alongside Cary Grant. The dress seemed to float, already anticipating the royalty destiny had prepared for her. That summer, thousands of women in the United States copied her looks. Scarves at the neck, dark glasses, the balance between glamour and simplicity. Grace had achieved what few ever do. She turned cinema into a moral runway. It wasn't just how she dressed, it was how she inhabited space. Hitchcock used to say that Grace didn't walk. She moved with the precision of a metronome. Every measured step, every controlled turn. That visual perfection became a school for future actresses and designers. The body stopped being an accessory. It became architecture. For the public, she was the embodiment of an unattainable ideal. For designers, the perfect canvas. For fashion, a religion in itself. When in 1955 she won the Oscar for The Country Girl, she appeared at the ceremony in an aqua green satin gown, minimalist, without ostentatious jewelry. On a night of sequins, she chose the silence of color. And that gesture changed the rules of the red carpet. From then on, sobriety could shine too. Grace Kelly had moved from actress to archetype. Her elegance was not just an aesthetic matter, it was a form of behavior, a new visual language that redefined the codes of femininity in the West. In barely 5 years of career, she established a truth fashion has not forgotten. That style is not imposed, it is transmitted with calm. And while the studios prepared new projects, Europe was waiting for her. Destiny offered her another stage, one where her elegance would cease to be representation and become history. The next act would not be filmed on celluloid, but on silk. Paris was a murmur of fabrics and whispers. In the mid-50s, fashion houses competed to seduce the stars of Hollywood. But when Grace Kelly crossed the door of Cristobal Balenciaga's atelier on Avenue George IV, the air changed. There was no grand greeting, no theatrical poses, only a silent look between two perfectionists who understood, without words, that they shared the same creed. The creed of pure form. Balenciaga did not speak of fashion. He spoke of structure, of architecture, of divine proportion. His workshop smelled of freshly cut linen and discipline. While other designers sought provocation, he pursued the peace of perfect lines. And standing before him, that American woman seemed to embody everything his aesthetic preached: sobriety, balance, control. She was his ideal in flesh and movement. Grace was not looking for dresses. She was looking for order. Her eye was trained for harmony, and she found in Balenciaga a reflection of herself. Between them was born a complicity without artifice. They needed no applause, only silence and exactness. He watched her try on a piece of white organza, without adornment, without jewels. The fabric floated around her body as if afraid to touch her, and in that instant, Balenciaga murmured softly, "Perfection doesn't need witnesses." From that encounter on, Grace's name began to be spoken in the most exclusive fashion circles of Paris, not just as an actress, but as a living lesson in form and restraint. While Dior and Givenchy dominated the headlines, Balenciaga preferred the anonymity of his atelier, yet celebrated quietly that his work had found its definitive muse. The dresses she commissioned for her appearances in Europe had something no other celebrity possessed: the absence of excess. No prints, no embellishments, no concessions. The power of the fabric rested in the fall, in the air that remained between the seam and the skin. It was a new kind of sensuality, almost spiritual. When Grace visited Spain shortly after, journalists noticed the change. She no longer dressed like an actress, but like a queen who did not yet know she was one. Every fold, every movement seemed rehearsed by geometry. Balenciaga did not transform her. He simply gave language to what already existed in her. The style that emerged from that union would define a decade. Rigidity became softness, luxury became serenity. Women began to seek that same clean line, that same serene gesture. Fashion houses copied her silhouettes. Department stores in New York imitated her tones. Without a single word, Grace Kelly and Balenciaga had signed a silent manifesto: elegance as the architecture of the soul. Years later, when asked about her favorite designer, Grace answered with the smallest smile, "Balenciaga taught me that beauty is a matter of proportion, not noise." And she was right. In an era of opulence, the two of them proved that the essential needs no adornment, only balance, only light, only truth. That collaboration was never a contract. It was an aesthetic communion. The craftsman of silence and the woman who spoke without words had created a new religion of fashion. A religion where every dress was a temple and every movement a prayer. The echo of that alliance can still be felt on the runways of the 21st century, where minimalism continues to honor the serenity they invented. Because the history of fashion has many muses, but few priestesses. And among all of them, one continues to shine with the calm of the eternal. Grace Kelly, dressed by Balenciaga, was not just an image. She was proportion made flesh. Silence made style. Purity made form. On April 19, 1956, the world held its breath. From Monaco to New York, radios broadcast live what would be remembered as the wedding of the century. It was not only the union of an actress and a prince, it was the fusion of two universes, American glamour and European tradition, the fantasy of cinema and the solemnity of royalty. At the altar, beneath the white vault of St. Nicholas Cathedral, the myth took form. Grace Kelly advanced between marble columns dressed in eternity. Her wedding gown, designed by Helen Rose from MGM Studios, was Hollywood's most carefully guarded secret. 25 meters of silk taffeta, 19th century Brussels lace, and pearls sewn by 36 seamstresses over 6 weeks. The veil, so delicate it seemed like mist, covered her face, as if history itself feared looking at her directly. When the doors opened, the Mediterranean light crossed the stained glass and illuminated that dress like an apparition. It was not ostentatious. It was perfect. The absolute balance between modesty and splendor. In that moment, fashion ceased to be superficial and became sacred. The world saw in her the materialization of a dream. A woman who had conquered Hollywood not through scandals, but through elegance, and who now became a princess without losing a gram of authenticity. It was the logical continuity of her style. What had been delicacy transformed into majesty. The images circled the planet. Magazines published color covers. Broadcasters described the lace, the flowers, the gloves, the bouquet of lily of the valley. For weeks, designers in New York and Paris copied every detail. Brides around the world began requesting the Grace Kelly dress. White was no longer innocence. It was aspiration. That day, without intending to, Grace redefined the aesthetics of the modern wedding. Until then, weddings were either excessive or overly formal. She turned them into an act of purity. In her slow walk, fashion discovered something more than elegance. It discovered the power of restraint. Prince Rainier looked at her with admiration and a trace of astonishment. Even at her own wedding, she seemed to command the scene with cinematic naturalness. Her serenity was so perfect that photographers claimed time stopped in every frame. There was no theatricality, only a truth so orderly it seemed impossible. In the days that followed, newspapers headlined, "Grace Kelly no longer belongs to cinema, she belongs to history." And they were right, because beyond the ceremony, what was born that day was a new feminine ideal, the modern princess, cultured, independent, refined. Fashion brands began adapting her figure to mannequins. The haute couture houses drew inspiration from the dress's silhouette. Defined waist, high collar, long sleeves, voluminous skirt, clean lines. Dior, Givenchy, Balenciaga, all reinterpreted her essence. In a matter of months, Grace Kelly had not only changed how brides dressed, but also how royalty dressed. The Vatican praised her sobriety. Vogue declared her look the triumph of harmony. And the public, mesmerized, understood that true sophistication was not in luxury, but in measure. That dress, now preserved at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, remains a reference for designers and dreamers. Decades later, when Kate Middleton married Prince William, her gown, designed by Sarah Burton for Alexander McQueen, was a direct homage to Grace Kelly. The lace neckline, the defined waist, the long veil, history repeating itself with the same melody. Because the myth did not disappear with time, it multiplied. Every elegant wedding carries something of her. Every design seeking balance between purity and glamour cites her, even if it doesn't say so. Grace Kelly was not just a bride. She was the rebirth of the ideal of feminine elegance. That morning, while the bells of Monaco rang and the Mediterranean reflected the glow of the lace, the world understood something simple and eternal. That beauty does not need to shout. It only needs to breathe in silence. And so, the actress became a princess, and fashion became memory. A myth was born, and her dress, like her legacy, would never wrinkle with time. After the wedding, Monaco woke up in another century. The small principality, once discreet and almost invisible along the Mediterranean coast, transformed into the new epicenter of global elegance. Newspapers spoke of a cinematic monarchy. But behind the headlines, what had truly occurred was something deeper. Royalty had become a runway, and its silent queen, the face that would dictate the taste of an era. Grace Kelly understood from the very first day that she was no longer performing for a camera, but for history. Every public appearance, every banquet, every diplomatic visit was a carefully orchestrated scene, not for spectacle, but for legacy. The flashes had changed their intention. They no longer sought the star, but the symbol. Her first appearances as princess marked a before and after. While other royals dressed according to protocol rules, Grace reinvented them with the precision of an artist. She turned duty into style, formality into delicacy. Her day outfits were impeccable. Ivory tones, pale blue, powdered pink. Her jewelry measured to the millimeter, never one piece more than necessary. She was the queen of proportion, of well-dressed silence. In 1957, during a gala at the Monte Carlo Opera House, she wore a white gown with a bow on the shoulder and a discreet diamond brooch. The press described the scene as an apparition rather than a presence. And so was born an aesthetic that would soon be known as the Elegance of Monaco, a diplomatic, clean, serene style where sophistication was expressed through moderation. The entire court began to adjust to her rhythm. The ladies-in-waiting imitated her hairstyle. Local seamstresses learned to copy the fall of her skirts. Even the Paris runways adjusted their collections inspired by her choices. Dior reinforced pure lines. Givenchy softened contrasts. Hermès began developing more structured handbags, perfect for a modern princess. Grace had become an involuntary cultural ambassador. She did not impose trends. She breathed them. Her way of dressing became diplomatic language. In one meeting, a beige tone could signify respect. In another, a pastel blue symbolized closeness. She understood the power of nuances the way someone masters a language. Her style united two worlds, American precision and European craftsmanship. In a single glance, in a single ensemble, the austerity of Balenciaga could coexist with the softness of Dior, the sobriety of the Atlantic with the Mediterranean glow. And that fusion created something unprecedented, transatlantic elegance. Fashion photographers fought for every public appearance. When she attended the Cannes Film Festival in 1959, wearing a sky blue silk dress, the press called it Grace Blue. In Rome, her appearance in a white tailored suit inspired a wave of imitations. In New York, boutiques began announcing in their windows, "The Monaco style has arrived in the city." But the most fascinating thing was her naturalness. Grace didn't need to reinvent herself each season. Fashion revolved around her like planets around a sun that never moved. Her consistency was her revolution. While the rest of the world changed its skin every year, she remained the same. Serene, luminous, impeccable. And that stability became aspirational. By the mid-60s, major fashion publications agreed on one idea. Elegance had ceased to be spectacle and had become education. And its teacher had a name and surname, Grace Kelly. Young European women began copying her silhouette. Fashion institutes studied her photographic proportions as if they were visual theorems. In a world undergoing cultural transformation, her figure was the reminder that modernity did not necessarily have to break with tradition. Grace had achieved the impossible, making protocol modern, turning obedience into artistic expression. The press described her as a sculpture in motion, but those who knew her understood that behind that image there was method, preparation, and an almost religious respect for detail. Every color, every texture, every button responded to a purpose. Fashion, in her hands, became political and poetic narrative at the same time. Even her residence, the Prince's Palace of Monaco, began to reflect her style. The interiors were redesigned with simple lines, fresh flowers, soft tones. Nothing ostentatious, everything measured. Elegance had ceased to be a matter of appearance. It had become a way of inhabiting the world. Her role as princess redefined the place of women in contemporary royalty. They were no longer state ornaments, but cultural figures. Grace was the first to demonstrate that a princess could have influence beyond protocol, that she could be icon, muse, and style mentor at the same time. And as the Mediterranean ignited every evening before the palace, the waves reflected her image in headlines across half the world. The woman who had conquered Hollywood now ruled without raising her voice, with a simple dress, with a scarf at her neck, with a gaze that dictated the rhythm of global taste. Grace Kelly's elegance was no longer American or European. It was universal. And from then on, no crown ever shone the same. Barely a year had passed since her coronation, when the name Grace Kelly began to separate itself from her royal title. She was no longer Her Serene Highness. She was the Grace Kelly style. The press defined it as an invisible formula: clean lines, soft palettes, measured gestures, but the truth was simpler and deeper. The Kelly style was not a set of garments, but a way of being in the world. Her image began to repeat itself like a mantra in magazines, store windows, and design studios. Women saw her as an aesthetic compass, designers as a source of visual discipline. Grace had shown that elegance did not need drama. Her style was a score played in silence: structured jackets, natural waists, subtly flared skirts, leather gloves, tiny pearls. Every detail had intention. Nothing was accidental. In the early 60s, Vogue published an edition titled The Geometry of Grace. On its pages, Grace's face appeared among soft shadows and neutral backgrounds. The article described her as the woman who turned moderation into art. And thus the myth was born. The idea that true sophistication was not about owning more, but choosing less. Her wardrobe became material for study. Monaco's archives held dozens of custom-made suits from Dior, Balenciaga, and Givenchy, all sharing a single philosophy: not to dazzle, but to endure. Perfect tailoring was her signature, harmony her perfume. And then, without seeking it, history gave her a symbol that would forever immortalize her name in fashion. In 1958, during her first pregnancy, photographers tried to capture her as she left the hospital. Grace, discreet, lifted her Hermès calfskin handbag and placed it in front of her belly to protect her privacy. The image circled the world. Within days, the accessory became an object of desire. Hermès, flooded with orders, officially renamed the model the Kelly bag. That spontaneous gesture, a woman hiding a secret with elegance, transformed a simple accessory into an icon. The press called it the revolution of modesty. But in reality, it was the essence of the Kelly style, turning reserve into beauty. That bag was not merely fashion, it was a lesson. A reminder that true class is not displayed, it is suggested. From then on, every appearance Grace made was dissected by critics, with the devotion others reserved for works of art. Her way of pairing a silk scarf with dark glasses, of mixing a Dior dress with short Balenciaga gloves, of walking with a handbag in her left hand as if holding a promise. Everything was imitated, everything studied. In New York, Life magazine published a report titled "The New Religion of Good Taste," showing young women trying to replicate her style. Sales of silk blouses, midi skirts, and white gloves skyrocketed. American stores began promoting collections with slogans like "Dress like Grace, live like Grace." What was fascinating was that her influence transcended fashion. The Kelly style became a symbol of emotional and moral balance. Women adopted it, not only to look good, but to project calm, control, and inner sophistication. Grace had transformed aesthetics into ethics. Dressing well was no longer a matter of taste, but of attitude. The most iconic photographs of her, walking through Monte Carlo, waving from the palace balcony, holding her children's hands, defined the visual imagination of the modern woman. Refined, contained, but with a light of her own that depended on no one. Fashion began responding to her. Luxury houses sought to reinterpret her legacy. Hermès launched new versions of the Kelly bag in different colors and materials. Dior incorporated her sobriety into its new Elegance lines. Valentino found inspiration in her structured softness to create dresses that seemed to breathe with the body. Even decades later, the DNA of the Kelly style remains alive in contemporary design. But what made it eternal was not the clothing, but the coherence. Grace Kelly never betrayed her own canon. She never tried to appear younger, more modern, or more daring. Her secret was fidelity, to her essence, to her rhythm, to her truth. There lay her power. And fashion, which lives off constant change, found in her the miracle of the unchanging. In a late interview, when a journalist asked if she considered herself a style icon, she smiled with that calm that held everything. "No, dear. I have only been consistent." That answer, brief and perfect, summarized the entire manifesto of the Kelly style. Because in the end, elegance is not about being admired, but being remembered effortlessly. And Grace Kelly remains exactly that, the perfect measure between simplicity and splendor. Cinema gave her fame, royalty, a title, but it was her style that granted her eternity. The world was changing. It was the 60s. Miniskirts ruled London, pop flooded Paris, and youth lifted banners against anything that smelled of tradition. Fashion, for the first time, became rebellion. Colors were strident, prints were wild, forms broke every previous rule. And yet, in the midst of that global noise, one woman kept dressing with the calm of a Monaco sunrise. Grace Kelly. While Twiggy danced in shop windows and Mary Quant redrew the female silhouette, she remained unshaken. No provocation, no scandal, no effort. The whole world ran, but she kept walking. And that stillness became her personal revolution. In an era where irreverence was synonymous with modernity, Grace proved that sobriety could be just as subversive. Her serene elegance became an act of resistance against speed, against the ephemeral, against saturation. While fashion shouted, "Look at me," she whispered, "Look at yourself." And in that gesture, she invented the most enduring modernity of all, the modernity of balance. During Monaco's official trips, her wardrobe became a diplomatic lesson. In the United States, she wore clean-lined suits and neutral colors, a rational elegance that evoked American precision. In France, she chose fluidity and romanticism, fabrics that seemed to move with the wind. In Spain or Italy, she embraced the architectural simplicity she loved in Balenciaga. Each look was a conversation between cultures, a silent symphony of respect and measure. Designers fascinated, began to understand something that had once seemed contradictory, that restraint could also be avant-garde. Dior softened its silhouettes. Givenchy leaned toward softer tones. Emerging designers like Valentino discovered in her a different kind of muse, one who did not impose trends, but purified them. In 1966, during a gala dinner in Paris, Grace appeared in a beige empire-cut dress, without jewelry, without adornments, without effort. The press described the scene as a slap to the vanity of the modern world. That same year, Harper's Bazaar published an editorial titled "The Rebellion of Silence," dedicated entirely to her style. The article began, "While everyone talks, she continues to be heard." Her influence transcended the limits of royalty. On university campuses, young women protesting social norms found in her a paradoxical figure, a woman of power who did not need to challenge anything to exist. And although her life appeared opposite to the feminist liberation of the time, her presence offered another form of independence, the kind born from control, not from shouting, but from calm. Modern women, tired of visual excess and fast fashion, began rediscovering sobriety as a gesture of strength. Simplicity became a manifesto, and deep down, all of them were following Grace's example, even if they never said it. The Kelly style survived trends because it did not depend on them. It was like a moral architecture. It could be reinterpreted, but never surpassed. Each generation found in it a refuge from aesthetic chaos. As the years passed, her figure transformed into a fixed point on fashion's horizon, a compass, a pause. In the 70s, when the metallic shine of glam and the frenzy of disco took center stage, Grace stayed the same. Faithful to her natural fabrics, her neatly gathered hair, her effortless elegance. Fashion houses surrendered to her coherence. She didn't need to update herself because she had never gone out of style. And that was her greatest triumph. Photographers of the time, Richard Avedon, Cecil Beaton, Howell Conant, agreed on one thing. Her face had no time. It didn't seem to belong to any decade, but to the very idea of the eternal. Every photo of her was modern, even when the rest of the world changed. It was then that the term quiet elegance began to gain popularity. It was not a trend. It was a cultural movement, inspired directly by her. Magazines defined the concept as the elegance that does not seek to impress, but to inspire. And in every definition, Grace's name appeared as its silent origin. She never proclaimed it, but her mere existence became a response to the speed of the 20th century. In an era obsessed with the new, Grace Kelly represented the necessary. Her sobriety was not nostalgia, it was future, an invitation to look again at what is essential. And so, the actress turned princess became something much greater, the guardian of taste. The balance between luxury and humility, between power and serenity. The woman who proved that the most revolutionary style of all is not about breaking rules, but understanding why they are worth keeping. When the world shifted decades, fashion had already learned its lesson. Simplicity, proportion, calm, everything she represented had become universal aspiration. And although the runways would continue to turn, her shadow, invisible and perfect, would never stop walking beside them. Grace Kelly did not follow trends. She dismantled them, purified them, and returned them to the world clean. That was her revolution. A revolution without noise, without signs, without speeches. Only a woman dressed in sobriety who taught fashion how to breathe. With the passage of time, Grace Kelly stopped being only a memory. She became an inevitable reference. Her image, reproduced millions of times in magazines, museums, and screens, had left such a profound mark that no later generation could escape it. She was not a shadow, she was a guide. Her legacy extended like a golden thread through the names that would shape the history of fashion and royalty. First came Caroline of Monaco, her daughter, transformed into the natural muse of European refinement. She inherited the same stillness, the same soft light in the face. Magazine covers showed her in Chanel and Dior dresses, but always with something that recalled her mother. That way of holding the gaze, of speaking with elegance before speaking with words. Caroline did not imitate Grace, she reinterpreted her. Where her mother was classicism, she added melancholy. Where there was serenity, she added character. But the essence remained, intact. Then came Stephanie, the rebel. Loose hair, leather, motorcycles, sensuality. And yet, even in her defiance, Grace's silhouette remained latent, because every rebellion needs a cannon to break, and Grace Kelly had established the strongest one of all. Her elegance was the starting point, even for those who tried to escape it. Decades later, another princess would carry her legacy into the 21st century. Charlene of Monaco, former swimmer, modern, athletic. But when she walked down the aisle at her wedding to Prince Albert, the world saw the same purity, the same balance, the same sacred restraint. The dress, signed by Giorgio Armani, was interpreted as a contemporary echo of Grace's gown. High collar, pure lines, zero ostentation. History was not repeating itself, it was remembering itself. But the lineage of Grace Kelly's elegance was not limited to her blood. Her influence crossed oceans, centuries, and cultures. In the United Kingdom, Diana Spencer found in her a possible mirror, a modern princess caught between duty and emotion. Both shared a natural ability to communicate through image. But while Diana moved between vulnerability and charisma, Grace had represented absolute control. Two poles of a single truth, fashion as a language of power and fragility. Later, Kate Middleton would pick up that aesthetic heritage. Her wedding dress, lace, long sleeves, defined waist, was an open tribute to Grace's legacy. Even her way of facing the cameras, that studied serenity, seemed like an echo of Monte Carlo in London. In every official appearance, Kate perpetuated the ideal Grace had founded, elegance as visual ethics. In haute couture, the mark was equally visible. Valentino based his entire philosophy on that silent purity. Carolina Herrera, in the 80s, confessed she had built her career inspired by Grace Kelly's moral elegance. Ralph Lauren, with his American classic collections, mentioned her as the perfect balance between refinement and naturalness. Even contemporary designers like Elie Saab or Max Mara continue citing her aesthetic as a starting point. Runways invoke her constantly. In every white dress with a high collar, in every structured skirt, in every handbag with clean lines, there is a trace of her. And not only in luxury fashion, modern minimalist brands, the Row, Céline, Totem, are distant daughters of the school she created without trying. Sobriety as a symbol of sophistication. Her image also shaped visual culture. Cinema immortalized her in characters inspired by her aura. From Breakfast at Tiffany's to The Queen's Gambit, every elegant and silent protagonist carries, at the core, a fragment of her shadow. In photography, portraits of Grace became manuals of composition, balance, natural light, geometry of the face. In advertising, she remained synonymous with eternal luxury. Cartier, Hermès, even contemporary perfumes like Grace de Monaco have turned her into a brand of aesthetic spirituality. And the most astonishing thing is that her elegance survived the speed of the digital age. On Instagram, where brightness and immediacy dominate, her black and white images continue generating millions of views. The hashtags #GraceKelly and #Kelly Style accumulate millions of mentions every year. New generations, born among screens, rediscover her as a refuge from excess. In a world saturated with stimuli, her calm feels revolutionary. What once was a way of dressing became a way of existing. Her legacy is not a trend, it is a visual education. She taught us that true style does not seek attention, but respect, and that elegance is not measured by the gaze of others, but by inner serenity. Today, when a woman chooses a simple dress, a gathered hairstyle, a contained gesture, she is dialoguing with her without knowing it. Because Grace Kelly no longer belongs to a time or a throne, she belongs to the collective memory of beauty. Her heritage lives in every attempt at balance, in every search for light without noise. And so, generation after generation, her elegance reincarnates not in form, but in intention. In that delicate will not to impress, but to inspire. Grace Kelly did not only change the history of fashion, she created an invisible line that still crosses time. A school without walls, a religion without dogmas, an elegance that continues breathing in those who, without knowing it, still imitate her each morning in front of the mirror. The decades passed, but her face never disappeared. The world changed its language, its rhythm, its morals. But the image of Grace Kelly remained intact, like a photograph that doesn't age. In the era of visual excess, where fashion is measured in seconds and elegance in filters, her figure resurfaced as a reminder of everything time had forgotten. Calm, proportion, the truth of gesture. In museums, her wedding dress is treated as a relic. At auctions, a scarf that once belonged to her can reach prices that defy reason. But its value is not in the fabric or the label, but in what it represents. The possibility of a beauty that never exhausts itself. Grace Kelly was not a style, she was a standard, and every new generation measures its taste against her shadow. The fashion houses of the 21st century know it well. Dior remembers her in its pure lines and nacreous tones, Chanel in its structured tweed suits, Hermès in the devotion that still surrounds the Kelly bag, now a global symbol of restrained luxury. Even Gucci and Louis Vuitton, in the digital age, pay homage to her classical balance in campaigns where sobriety is the new gold. Because the elegance she embodied, that blend of discipline and tenderness, became the universal language of luxury. In cinema, her spirit reappears again and again. From Nicole Kidman portraying her in Grace of Monaco, to actresses who emulate her serenity on the red carpet, Grace continues dictating how the sublime is represented. No actress wears a white dress, an updo, or a serene gaze without invoking, knowingly or not, the echo of her image. She is the invisible mold of cinematic elegance. Perfume brands turned her into a metaphor for the feminine aura. Cartier imagined her as a crystallized flower. Armani as absolute balance. Dior as the soul that breathes within the fabric. Her name is a magic word that elevates any product. Because in the collective mind, Grace Kelly does not sell objects, she sells eternity. Social networks, which devour idols at a dizzying speed, failed to erode her myth. On Instagram, Pinterest, or TikTok, thousands of accounts recreate her looks, compare her photographs, study her body language. Her style became a hashtag, but also an antidote. In a world of noise, her silence became trend again. 20-year-olds who have never seen one of her films cite her as inspiration. Grace Kelly became a visual refugee for a generation searching for authenticity amid artifice. The industry reinterprets her as well. In 2019, Gucci launched a collection inspired by Grace's portraits on the Riviera, blending romanticism with minimalist modernity. Dior, in its New Look Reborn show, dedicated a segment to women who redefined femininity without provocation, led by her. And Hermès, every year, continues reinventing the Kelly bag without altering its essence. The perfect balance between structure and softness, just like its original owner. Her influence even crossed technological borders. Digital 3D fashion designers cite her as the muse of visual order. In metaverses and virtual realities, her silhouette continues to appear. The high collar, the defined waist, the serene posture. Even artificial intelligence, when generating ideal feminine faces, unconsciously echoes the symmetry of her gaze, because perfection, when it has soul, leaves traces in the machine. The myth of Grace Kelly persists because it embodies an ideal that does not depend on context, the ideal of beauty without noise. Her legacy shows that elegance is not an aesthetic state, but a moral one. And for that reason, each time global culture becomes saturated with excess, the pendulum swings back toward her. Each time the world seeks to recover balance, her name resurfaces, immaculate, as if time itself protected her. Her face continues to appear in campaigns, documentaries, essays, and exhibitions. Design schools study her public appearances as exercises in visual coherence. Fashion museums treat her as a genetic code of the 20th century. And on every social network, in every generation yearning to return to the essential, the algorithm shows her again, with the same light, the same calm, the same divine proportion. Because at the core, Grace Kelly represents what the 21st century longs for and cannot manufacture: authenticity. She never needed reinvention because she was never artifice. Her beauty did not depend on makeup, but on mastery of self. And that is why her image continues to work while so many others fade. Fashions change, trends die, but her name lingers in the air like a perfume impossible to forget. Grace Kelly was not a trend. She was the pause that every trend needs to remember what it means to be eternal. As evening falls, the Palace of Monaco turns golden. The sea reflects a calm that seems written for her. Nothing sounds, except the wind that touches the columns like a memory. There, among the soft shadows of the garden, the story of Grace Kelly continues to breathe. There are no cameras left, no flashes, no headlines, only that unmistakable sensation she left behind. The certainty that elegance does not die, it transforms. Because Grace was never a character, nor an actress, nor a princess. She was a measure of time, a moment of balance in the chaos of the century. The world remembers her with nostalgia, but also with gratitude. Every generation that looks back at her rediscovers something essential: that true beauty is not found in luxury, but in calm. That dressing well is not about displaying oneself, but about understanding oneself, and that a woman can change the history of fashion without raising her voice, simply by being faithful to herself. Her legacy is not limited to a dress or a bag. It lives in the way a woman enters a room, in the way she inclines her head, in the way she lets silence speak. Every gesture of serenity in modern fashion, every neutral tone, every clean line, every act of discretion, carries an echo of her. In Monte Carlo, the air still seems to hold her perfume. In the archives of Dior and Hermès, her name continues to appear in notes along the margins. And in the hearts of those who seek a beauty beyond appearance, her light keeps guiding. Grace Kelly was not a trend. She was an answer to haste, to noise, to oblivion. A proof that simplicity can be sublime, and that delicacy, when it is authentic, has more power than any crown. 50 years later, her image still appears every time someone utters the word elegance. And though time moves forward, her reflection does not fade. It only becomes clearer, more necessary, more human. Because there are bodies that time erases, but there are souls that time amplifies. And among all of them, one continues walking, dressed in light, Grace Kelly.